Well, good morning to you all on Monday the 20th of August. The papers are full today again about Kevin Rudd and what he might or might not have done at a New York lap dance bar 4 years ago in New York. And Kevin Rudd has said he'll take a belting at the opinion polls. Well, if Kevin Rudd's going to take a belting at the opinion polls, it should be on policy, not on some indiscretion of 4 years ago. We're not looking for Mother Teresa to be Prime Minister of Australia. I'm more concerned about a policy announcement that he made a couple of weeks ago that he'd offer tax breaks to private companies that build new housing stock, and he'd rent the stuff out at 20% less than the market rate. Now, he's at great pains to tell us that families earning up to $80,000 a year could apply to live in the new buildings and would save between $50 and $90 a week, depending on their circumstances. Now, in the first place, there'd be an annual means test, which means if the policy did work, which it won't, you could be booted out of your home every time there's a means test. And of course, Kevin Rudd would hope that the 20% they wouldn't pay in rent, which would be paid by you, the taxpayer, would be put towards a home of their own. Who's kidding whom? Why is it that every time governments chart new policy directions, it's always about spending your money? Why would someone who had a 20% subsidy on his rent put the 20% away for a new home? Why wouldn't they just continue to live in the new, cheaper apartment and have a few more bob on the favourite in the Fifth at Randwick every week? How this would promote home ownership, I've got no idea. Of course, can you imagine if you owned the place next door? Here's the government subsidising rents, forcing down the price of rent in some apartments, and you own the place next door, and you're trying to rent it for 20% more than a subsidised tenant is paying. Wouldn't you be happy? In other words, a government policy forcing down the value of your property. I don't think you'd be too excited, unless, of course, Kevin Rudd wants the price of his own house to fall. As Peter Costello said, what on earth are we doing giving tax breaks for builders and developers, but not for home buyers? But the situation is worse than that. Because, and this is where the New York bit comes into it, because what happened in New York is far less important than what Kevin Rudd was at on the day he announced the policy. Every television station carried the story, and there was Kevin Rudd talking to a woman walking around a kitchen table. Kevin Rudd asked her what she was paying. Obviously, she was a Labor supporter, and she told him she was paying $250 a week, to which Mr. Rudd said she'd be eligible for a $50 to $60 reduction in weekly rent. That was an absolute and arrant lie. As Peter Costello said in Parliament, the Labor Party policy only applied to 50,000 houses or apartments to be built commencing in 2008 and didn't apply to people who were already in rental properties. So on national television, Mr. Rudd's given the voting public the wrong impression. Did he do that deliberately or not? It was a promise that couldn't be kept. But all those people who are renting and were watching the news would believe that under Kevin Rudd, they'd be eligible for a reduction in their present rental accommodation. Now, surely to God, this can't go on because there's an election. And where are the Canberra Press Gallery? How gullible are those people compiling news bulletins? Some would say it was a misleading statement to the renting public. Others, less charitable, would say it was a lie. And when Peter Costello picked it up in the Parliament the next day, why wasn't the Costello analysis fully and comprehensively reported? The so-called housing debate's been full of enough untruths as it is. We can do without this one. Nothing Kevin Rudd has said yet or is likely to say is going to make any impact whatever on what people are paying now in rent. If he's then going to, down the track, subsidise developers so that people can pay less for rent, then the one result of that will be to reduce the value of your house and your property. People have to work out whether that's the kind of policy they're wanting from an alternative Prime Minister. The so-called housing debate is a farce and a mess. But to represent yourself as an alternative Prime Minister on national television, telling people they'd be eligible for a $50 to $60 reduction in weekly rent when plainly that is an untruth, that's something that should be a headline in the paper, well ahead of what might or might not have happened in New York. I'm Alan Jones.